us on 11th of December, only on Bloomberg Quint.
Good morning, you're watching Daybreak on Bloomberg Quint Live and I'm Alex Matthew. First, the headlines. The big one, Urjit Patel resigns as RBI governor with immediate effect, citing personal reasons. Experts and brokerage houses warn of a sharp fall in equities, weaker rupee and correction in bonds as the RBI governor resignation triggers concerns. The SGX Nifty currently is down more than 1.5%. Assembly election results, and that's the focus today, in 5 states will be announced. Counting will begin shortly. Exit polls have predicted a photo finish in Madhya Pradesh and Chhattisgarh. And faced with the prospects of a huge defeat, UK Prime Minister Theresa May has deferred the Brexit vote. She will head to Brussels to seek reassurances from the European Union leaders. And a UK magistrate's court recommends fugitive willful defaulter Vijay Mallya be extradited to India. Mallya has 14 days to appeal against the verdict. Now, saying that it was a news-heavy evening is a bit of an understatement. We'll come back to most of those major news points shortly, but let's take a check on the US markets before we do. US stocks closed higher on Monday as major indices bounced back from earlier losses as renewed confidence in the strength of the US economy offset lingering worries over the US-China trade dispute. Bloomberg's Sue Keenan wraps up all the action on Wall Street in this report.
It was another wild ride on Wall Street and a massive reversal of stock losses that left many at the end of the day asking what just happened. After the Brexit vote was delayed, raising concerns here in the U.S. that the deal might not happen and it would worsen the economic outlook, stocks plunged. Bank stocks and energy led the way. In fact, oil took its biggest tumble in 2 weeks. But by mid-morning, there began a turnaround. At that point, the S&P 500 was on track for its worst December since the 1930s. The Dow was down more than 500 points, but somehow the buyers of tech stocks entered the market. Microsoft, Facebook, Broadcom surged, and by the end of the day, all 3 indices, the Dow, NASDAQ, and S&P, were in the green. One trader said it was unbelievable. Tech is running the market. Another strategist who had actually planned for stocks to break through key support levels in a very ugly sell-off said it was frustrating and difficult to trade. The frequency of the reversal is suggesting to some that something might be wrong in the market microstructure. The equity bulls fled the market and threw in the towel last week, and yet they were here at the end of the day on Monday. All of this sets up big questions about Tuesday trading on Wall Street, with many expecting volatility to remain. In New York, Sue Keenan, Bloomberg News.
Now, in all probability, Indian markets will fare very differently from their international counterparts. But at the same time, it's important to take a check as to how Asia is trading this morning. Let's go across to Rosalind Chin of Bloomberg, who's joining us from the Hong Kong studio live. What are you picking up this morning, Rosalind?
Well, a very mixed picture, in fact, emerging right before my very eyes. We did see China and Hong Kong open for trade only about a few minutes ago, and we're seeing they are opening in positive territory. So we're seeing the Hang Seng Index, well, actually, Hang Seng Index is trading almost flat, down by just a tenth of 1%, but Shanghai Composite pulling higher by a third of 1%. The CSI 300 also pulling higher. We've had a few lines just coming out in the last few minutes from the Ministry of Commerce saying the China Vice Premier and Mnuchin discuss trade this morning. We had a few lines also talking about their view on the trade talk timetable, and Chinese Liu He, of course, the economic advisor, had phone calls with Mnuchin of the US as well. That's according to the Chinese Ministry of Commerce. So perhaps some hope there that these trade discussions are actually being able to move forward. On the other hand, we've also got some of the markets trading lower this morning. The Nikkei is trading just a little bit lower, actually pairing some of these losses now, almost flat at this moment in time. Topics, though, still down by about half of 1%. Overall, the MSCI Asia Pacific Index, of course, heavily weighted with Japanese stocks, is down by about a quarter of 1%. I also want to look at the Kospi. Now, that actually has just flipped into positive territory, up by about 1/5 of 1%. Samsung Biologic. Now, this is one of the big stocks there. It's one of the 7th biggest members of the Kospi, jumping as much as 26% earlier in the session. That's after the Korea Exchange Valuation Committee decided not to delist it. Now, trading resumed today after being halted since November 15th, after regulators said that there were some accounting irregularities. They broke some accounting rules around the IPO, which happened in 2016. But that particular stock, Samsung Biologic there, jumping in trade up by about just over 17.5% at this point in the session. But overall, although there is a little bit of a mixed picture here, it's hard to misjudge how the impact of the departure of the RBI governor has hit overall sentiment in this region. Back to you.
All right, thanks so much for that, Rosalind. Well, the big news back home, the spotlight this morning is shining brightly and straight on the RBI and the money markets. It's because the RBI governor's decision to step down little less than a year before his term came to an end. And in fact, only a few days before the RBI's next board meeting, Urjit Patel became the first governor in 18 years to resign before his term ended, and only the 4th RBI boss to do so. Experts and RBI watchers have predicted a sharp fall across asset classes in India as the government gets ready to find his replacement. Patel's differences with the government came to light earlier this year when his deputy, Viral Acharya, publicly spoke about interference in the RBI's functioning, signaling concerns across the spectrum. Now, Patel's resignation has put the government in a bit of a tight spot, with experts and RBI watchers making it clear that it is now up to the centre to restore the credibility and authority of the RBI governor's office.
I was under the impression that the last meeting, many of the contentious issues were resolved, even though there were some that were left out. I do not know what happened in between.
I'm deeply saddened and shocked that things have come to such a pass. The Reserve Bank had a very, very proud history of stability at the top, and the institution does have great respect both within the country as well as internationally. If indeed it is not due to real personal reasons, there must have been enough pressing reasons for him to take this ultimate step.
Not surprised at all. I expected it on November 19. Government's intention is to convert RBI into a board-managed company. And the person standing in the way are Dr. Patel and his deputy, Dr. Acharya. In my view, the government's intention are not honorable. The next appointment of governor will reveal the true agenda of the government.
We don't know what finally triggered Urjit's resignation. But the feeling that was being generated was the government was actually telling RBI the specific steps it should take rather than the problems it should solve. Central banks always have a plan B in place. The real question is, will the backup system be allowed to play its role?
Now, clearly, there's going to be a reaction in the money markets. In fact, already you can see the reaction in the 1-month forward contract between the dollar and the rupee. You saw it spike yesterday, currently trading around the 76.75 mark or thereabouts. It's trading 1.6% higher than previous close. You could see a major reaction in the bond markets as well. The yield, remember, has been trending lower in the recent past, but it could head higher today. If I remember correctly, it was just about the 5.8 level, but it could trend higher, of course, today, 7.58% on the bond yield, 10-year bond yield. Let's move on now and talk about the reaction possibly on foreign institutional investors. Bloomberg opinion columnist Komal Srikumar says Patel's resignation might prompt foreign investors to pull out investments in a hurry.
We have had 2 governors who wanted to keep the independence of the central bank. Raghuram Rajan was first, and Urjit Patel right now has been the second. So the real risk now, Heidi, is the fact that the government will name somebody who is more compliant with their needs. They want to take some of the excess reserves away from the central bank so that the government would be able to spend it. They also want the Reserve Bank of India to go slow in dealing with the bad loan problem, which is an enormous issue for the economy. Both these gentlemen, one after the other, the two governors, have been very strict in terms of the monetary policy. Their hawkish approach has helped bring inflation down. Now the risk is that there is a reversal, and if that happens, you just spoke a few minutes ago, Heidi, about rupee forwards already weakening. You can have the rupee really drop in the spot market on Tuesday when it opens, and you're probably also going to see bond yields increase and the equity indexes drop sharply on Tuesday in reaction to what happened.
Do investors get spooked by this, though? Can they afford not to be in Indian assets, even if it does appear that we'll end up getting a replacement at the head of the RBI who's going to take a decidedly less hawkish tone than his predecessor?
If a new person takes a less hawkish tone than the predecessor, yes, it is clearly possible that investors can look elsewhere for returns. Keep in mind that emerging markets have still been very much in a correction mode for the last several months. India got a reprieve in the last few weeks because oil prices, which are very important to India because oil is the most important import in the balance of trade. When the oil prices plummeted, the Indian rupee appreciated in the last few weeks. Some of it is going to get reversed because of the Urjit Patel change. And yes, investors are going to look elsewhere if India does not show promise in terms of the change. Also keep in mind that we have already had the growth rate start to come down. So you have slowing growth, the potential for an increase in the inflation rate, and then you also have the situation with a change in the central bank governors.
Well, clearly those markets are definitely going to be in focus. The money markets, of course, the equity markets as well, as of now indicating a downtick. Darshan Mehta is here to tell you all about that and also to tell you what levels to look forward to in the futures and options space. Darshan, well, to say that it was a news-heavy evening is clearly an understatement. The spotlight has shifted, obviously, from the assembly elections this morning to the RBI governor's resignation. How are we looking at the start of trade today?
Yeah, so this 150-point downtick on the SGX Nifty is mainly on reaction of the RBI governor reacting because the rupee 1 month forward spiked significantly. Bond yields are expected to go up. So that's the clear indication. State verdict again, the elections that will come in, the markets will react on that fashion. 150 points down on the SGX Nifty, indicating a very, very weak start that we have. How did the ADRs pan out in trade? And look at the sell-offs in banks, especially. HDFC Bank was down almost 5%. ICICI Bank was down 6%. Tata Motors continues to remain weak. It was down 5%. In fact, most of the ADRs ended with a negative bias. In fact, all of them ended with the lowest cut was 1.2%. So clearly you could see the impact that was there. And US markets managed to recover at the end of the days, but the Indian stocks managed to fall in trade. Again, clear indication of selling that happened on the Nifty, and it was a broad-based selling both on the mid-cap and the small-cap end of the market. Also selling pressure was seen. So Nifty was down 2%, but the Bank Nifty was also down close to 2%. The PSU banking was somehow a little bit better off than the other sectors, is something that we're seeing at this point of time. Real estate and pharma, these were the two indices which actually saw significant amount of selling. Real estate continues to bleed. Now, as far as flows are concerned, FIs were net buyers to the tune of 116 crores. DI sold in 146 crores in the cash market. Overall, if you're looking at the Nifty itself, what happened in trade, the Nifty was down 200 points, and basically companies like Reliance, HDFC, L&T, which have high weightages on the Nifty, managed to crack. On the other hand, some of the PSU stocks managed to move up. Maruti managed to move up, but the weight not as much as the companies that managed to fall in trade. So that's the traction that you're seeing in on the markets. What's happening with the commodity cues? Brent again coming slightly above the $60 barrel in mark. Overnight it was down almost 3% in trade. Commodities across the LME saw a negative reaction that came in. Most of them ended with a negative bias. Even in China, if you're looking at it, steel rebar is down almost 1.5%. Zinc is down almost 0.5% in trade. Aluminium has has managed to hold on, but for commodities also not the best of trading sessions. What happened on the F&O side of the market? Again, fresh short positions were seen on the, in fact, there was long unwinding that was seen on the Nifty. Open interest was down almost 2%, and again, selling pressures is something that you could see. Again, a 19% open interest drop on the Nifty Bank, indicating that longs were getting unwound in trade yesterday. It was down 1.5%. Where are positions being built? We are currently at the 10,500 mark in trade, where put writers see significant amount of resistance, support that will come in. So put writers are active from 10,500 to lower levels, and call writers from 10,500 to high levels. Now what will happen is we will open somewhere close between the 10,300 and 10,400. So people who, these red lines which took positions at 10,300, 400, 500, 600, probably even at high levels, they will be forced to shed positions in open interest. That is something that happened in trade yesterday also. If we pull up what happened in trade yesterday, again you could see that call writers became aggressive and put writers were forced to shed positions. Now these red lines will come in from 10,300 to 10,500, indicating that there could be more potential downside on the market at this point of time. As far as the stocks in the F&O ban is concerned, the two stocks that come in the F&O ban are Adani Enterprises and Adani Powers. PCR actually drops both for the Nifty and the Bank Nifty. 1.30 for the Nifty, close to 1 on the Bank Nifty. So there is weakness that was seen. Which were the counters which saw fresh shorts and fresh longs? Across the board, fresh short position, except for IGL. These are the counters which saw open interest built up with fresh shorts, and among the counters which saw long unwinding or short covering, companies, Hexaware and Coal India saw short covering, Indian Oil saw short covering, Ramco and Bharat Electronics saw long unwinding positions in markets yesterday.
Thanks so much for that, Darshan. Well, the other big update from last evening came from the international space. Theresa May has postponed the final vote on her Brexit deal after a last-minute conference call with cabinet ministers. A clear admission by the UK Prime Minister that she does not believe that she can get the unpopular EU withdrawal agreement through the House of Commons. Listen in to what she had to say.
For as long as we fail to agree a deal, the risk of an accidental no deal increases. So the government will step up its work in preparation for that potential outcome, and the Cabinet will hold further discussions on it this week.
So no clear details there. What happens next? Well, Bloomberg's Jody Schneider has the details in this report.
The EU said that at the time that the deal was negotiated with Theresa May, and they've said that again in recent days, that this is the deal on the table. They are not going to renegotiate. It's unclear what those reassurances could be, or frankly, how reassuring they could be, but perhaps they have said that they will try to help her think of how to get it through Parliament. I'm not sure, again, what that means, but I think at this point, what she's doing is trying to buy some time, clearly, by delaying that vote and going back to the EU, again, probably coming out of there pretty empty-handed.
On to the big story for the day. Counting in 5 Indian states, Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, Chhattisgarh, Telangana and Mizoram will commence shortly. Kaushik Vaidya is here to tell us what to expect from the result day today.
Here are 5 reasons why the numbers that come in today matter. In the 3 states of Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan and Chhattisgarh, you have BJP governments at the state in MP and Chhattisgarh for the last 15 years and in Rajasthan for the last 5 years. So this is seen as a mandate not just on those chief ministers, but on Mr. Modi and his central government for the last 4.5 years as well. Remember, these are 3 states where out of their 65 seats, 62 went to the BJP in 2014. Can that be held together? That's one. The second, these are agrarian states. So if there is any sort of farmer distress that's translating into votes against the BJP, which could happen elsewhere in the country, this is where today we'll know whether those votes are going against the BJP. That's the second thing to watch out for. Third, these are head-on contests in these three states between the BJP and the Congress. So Rahul Gandhi's potential as a leader who can take on the BJP and Mr. Modi's election machine is being tested today. That will translate into whether he can get more allies in the future in the next 6 months. On the point of allies is the fourth. The TDP and the Congress is a recent alliance that's come together in Telangana. That's being tested. Whether the Congress and the TDP, like other allies perhaps in 6 months from now, can come together, form alliances and convert that into victories, that's being seen. The fifth one, like the states that are going in for results today, You have other states in 6 months from now, which will have BJP governments in the state and the centre, and these are states that the BJP swept in 2014. Uttar Pradesh, Maharashtra, Haryana, Jharkhand, Bihar to an extent where they've come together with the JDU in the last 2 years. So the formula whether a BJP government and the centre is at the centre in the states is something voters vote for in 6 months from now is also something to watch out for very closely today.
Now, it's also the first day of the winter session of Parliament today, and it promises to be a stormy one, while it will be adjourned today as a mark of respect for Anant Kumar, who passed away while the House was in recess. The opposition will look to capitalise on Urjit Patel's resignation, while the BJP will be aiming to take credit for the UK Magistrate Court's decision to accept India's request to extradite Vijay Mallya. Now, to tell you a bit about that happened last evening as well. It has raised the Indian government's hopes of bringing home fugitive businessman Vijay Mallya. The UK court yesterday allowed his extradition to India to stand trial on the charges brought by the CBI and Enforcement Directorate. Let's listen in to what he had to say outside Westminster Magistrates Court.
That the judge has found a prima facie case that I made misrepresentations to IDBI Bank only and persuaded them to loan money to Kingfisher Airlines. Be that as it may, the judge was perfectly entitled to make whatever judgment she thought fit. I have my rights. You heard the judge. My legal team will consider various options and then I will decide going forward, and I shall certainly keep you informed.
That's a very calm reaction, and that's because he's not on a one-way ticket to India just yet. In fact, he still has 14 days to appeal the order in the higher court. So how long will it really be before he can be brought back to India? Vaksha Sachdev of The Quint explains.
It's still not game over for the dethroned king of good times. He can immediately file an appeal, which will be taken up in the event the Secretary of State decides to extradite him. Because at the end of the day, when a court in the UK recommends extradition, it goes to the Secretary of State, who has to consider whether or not this needs to be done, and they look at whether there are any legal bars to extradition. So these include a risk of death penalty, or that the person could be tried for some other offence that they've, rather than just the extradition offence itself. Or that this is a matter of sort of a political witch hunt or something like that. This is a factor which can be looked at. Now, Mallya can send his own arguments against extradition to the Secretary of State, who would then have to make a decision within 2 months. So remember, we get a decision on Monday, then it goes up to the Secretary of State, then within 2 months they have to make a decision. But even there, the Secretary of State could take longer than 2 months as well. It's not entirely necessary. Now, if the Secretary of State decides to extradite him, then Mallya's appeal kicks in and he goes up to the High Court, where they will be analysing both the Secretary of State's decision as well as the decision for it to be referred there in the first place. Now, let's assume that the High Court also upholds the extradition process. And again, remember, this is several months, perhaps even a year or two down the line. Then Mallya can still go and appeal to the Supreme Court if a substantial question of law is involved. So, what the main takeaway here is there's a long way to go in terms of months, if not years, before any decision to extradite Mallya becomes final. Even once all these legal avenues in the courts are exhausted, this doesn't mean the Secretary of State will necessarily order his extradition or immediately do so. They still have a lot of discretion. I mean, look at the Tiger Hanif case, one of Dawood's aides. All his legal avenues and appeals were rejected by 2013, but he still hasn't been extradited from there because the Secretary of State still hasn't made a decision. So, basically at this point, what we know is that the decision on 10th December is really not going to be the end of the story.
Definitely not. It could be several months, if not years, before we see the end to that. But Nikki Mirchandani is joining us now with the Stocks in News. Nikki, what are the stocks on your list today? Good morning. And what will be at the centre of action today?
clearly broader index moment will be more in focus, but then bunch of news that we're tracking this morning. I'm going to start off with Titagarh Wagon, where the company has received an order for around 1,560 from Indian Railways for providing and supplying manufacturing and supplying wagons. Lupin, which has received a tentative US FDA approval for Apivaxin tablets, which is used for reducing risk of stroke and deep vein thrombosis, if I've got that right. Reliance Communication, that's an ET exclusive that we're tracking, and the company has filed a contempt of court plea against DOT for not clearing spectrum sale to Reliance Jio within stipulated time. Also, we're looking at GM Infra, given that the company's subsidiary has already risen around 225 odd crore through compulsory convertible debenture, which is going to be used as an investment in its hydro project arm in Himachal Pradesh. Also, Cox & Kings, where the education arm has received an approval for the sale of UK-based company for around euro 467 million. However, this is subject to the approval from United Kingdom travel regulator. KDDL, which has got a board approval to acquire Swiss watch hands manufacturing company for Swiss franc around 4 lakhs. Also, State Bank of India, given that the company is going to be considering, the bank is going to be considering raising up to $1.25 billion in December 12 meeting. Back to you.
All right, thanks so much for that, Nikki. Well, there's going to be a lot to talk about over the course of today. In fact, all the results of the 5 elections, the assembly elections that are taking place in 5 states, will be out over the course of the day. Counting, as I told you, starts very shortly. You'll see the results as they come up on the website, bloombergquint.com. There's a live ticker that will tell you what the key fights are and what the counting is indicating over the course of the day, and that will culminate, of course, in the results. You can join in at that point to find out what this essentially means for the future of those states, and indeed in the run-up to the elections that will take place, the general elections in 2019. But that's all we have for you in this edition of Daybreak. Up next is All You Need to Know, so do stay tuned. This is Bloomberg Quint.